Oh man, I hope you guys are all ready for Margaret Rogerson. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I'm so nervous. I feel like the more I say I'm nervous, the less nervous somehow I feel. Like just getting it out there, like, oh, by the way, I'm hella nervous about this. I somehow feel like it reduces some of my nervousness. So if I keep saying that, it's just a calming mantra for me. Just be normal, Crow. That's a big ask, Shadow. Some might say impossible. I will try to present as a normal human being with actual thoughts that are not just excitement and fangirling. I will do my best. uh oh, I'm so nervous. Oh. Oh. Okay. Okay. You still you're doing great. I'm not doing anything. What do you mean I'm doing great? Nothing has begun yet. I appreciate your support nonetheless, though. You've got this. You have so much interviewing experience. Yeah, but I feel so the thing is, like everyone we've had on until now were authors I just like personally knew. So I was a bit more like familiar and comfortable with them just because like we've talked before. Like we're at least acquaintances. Whereas this is the first time I'm having an author on who I did not personally know before like reaching out to ask if they would want to come on. And also, she's one of my favorite authors, so like the starstruck feeling is incredibly strong. You do know her now? Well, I mean, kind of, but it's different. It's different. I just really want to make sure she has a good time. I want to make sure she feels comfortable and walks away feeling like it was fun. That is my biggest goal. She has been very kind though in all of our correspondence. Like she's just such a sweet human. Writers love talking about writing. I know, that's why I'm super excited. Who doesn't love talking about good books, good writing? Okay, I can do this. I can do this. Okay, I'm gonna go into like official, this part is going to be turned into a podcast episode later mode now. Welcome to another episode of Talk Story to Me, the series where we invite guest authors on to talk about their books, writing, publication journey, and just anything that seems cool. Today's guest is one I'm incredibly excited about. She is one of my personal favorite authors. I will buy anything that she puts out, like anything. It doesn't matter if it's about grass growing, I will buy it. I will consume it and I will love it. So today we have on the YA fantasy author, Margaret Rogerson. She is the New York Times bestselling author of An Enchantment of Ravens, Sorcery of Thorns, as well as its follow-up novella, Mysteries of Thorn Manor, and her most recent novel, Vespertine. So I am very excited. I will let her give a more thorough introduction of herself, but let us get her on call. Oh, wait, let me switch scene first. Okay, okay. I'm only incredibly nervous. It's totally fine. Everything's fine. Hello?
Mm.
Oh, welcome in. It is so good to have you on and be able to talk with you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I've really, really been looking forward to this.
I'm so glad. So have I. I've been trying to make sure that I don't just devolve into fangirlish glee and nonsense. So excited and nervous. But welcome
Well,
in.
we're all nerds here, so don't be nervous.
Yeah. Oh, that's always like such a reassuring thing to learn about someone that like you are both nerds because it already feels like there's that common ground.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like that's true, like of everyone in the publishing space. We're just all just massive nerds.
Yeah.
Socially awkward, massive nerds.
Oh God, I feel the socially awkward part.
Well, that's why we write books, right? So you don't have to interact with people.
Exactly. See, you understand. Like, if you write your own characters and worlds, you don't have to interact with real people and be nervous about interacting with real people. Just better all around.
100.
Well, would you like to introduce yourself for our viewers?
Sure. So I'm Margaret Rogerson. I write young adult fantasy. I have three full-length novels published, with the most recent one being Vespertine and the most popular one being Sorcery of Thorns. They are all standalones. And I've also written one novella, which was a follow-up to Sorcery of Thorns called Mysteries of Thorn Manor.
Oh, and all incredible books. It's funny you say Sorcery of Thorns was your most popular because I feel like that is the one that resonated with me the most in a lot of different ways. So it's kind of cool hearing that it sounds like it resonated with a lot of people.
Well, it is a book about magical books, so I think I cheated a little bit with that one.
Straight to the right reader's heart with that one.
Yeah, I pulled a cheat card.
Oh, nothing wrong with that. I mean, it gave the rest of us something excellent, so. Oh, someone in chat said Sorcery of Thorns is one of my absolute favorite books.
Oh, thank you. That's very sweet.
Well, I guess let's start from the very beginning. Like, you have such a amazing lineup. Like, how did it all begin? Like, when did you kind of start seriously writing? How did your publication journey go? And where are you at now?
Yeah, so I've been writing ever since I was a kid, really. Um, I always joke that writers, at least writers kind of my age range, sort of originated in one of two places. We either grew up writing fan fiction or we grew up role playing on the internet forums.
Oh,
I am in the latter camp. I actually got my start writing in middle school, on the Neopets role playing forums. Which ton actually I know so many other authors who are in the same boat.
I had something
So,
similar with the Warriors Cat fandom. I would go
oh
on
yeah.
fanfiction.net forums and roleplay.
Yeah, that's actually another one that I've heard a lot. That's another huge like origin story for authors.
Oh, sorry, keep going.
Oh no, not at all. So yeah, I that was sort of like online forum role playing was like my hobby growing up. But it wasn't until after college that I decided to really give writing for publication a serious shot. I think because I found myself at a point in my life when, I didn't have a serious career yet, and I felt like I still had some time to devote to writing and to actually try it. And I felt like it was a really unlikely dream, but that I would just always regret it if I just didn't try, you know?
Hmm.
So, yeah, I just made the resolution, okay, I'm going to just write a book and I'm going to finish the book. And that was sort of my only requirement. I just had to finish a novel. So, my first book, my first manuscript, took me about 2 years to write, I would say. I was also working a day job at the time, and that book was terrible. It was so bad.
I think
So I
that's a
did
common
finish.
trend for first books.
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah, for sure. So I did not get an agent with that one. It was pretty much just form rejections across the board, like easily over 40 form rejections for that book. Um, so that was discouraging, but while I was querying that one, I started writing a second book, which was ended up being An Enchantment of Ravens. And I think with that one, I just sort of learned, the first novel was a failure essentially, but I learned a lot from it. So in a sense, it wasn't really a failure; it was a learning experience. And I think what that first book taught me was I was sort of I was writing to prove something to people, not writing for myself and really putting my heart into a book. I was sort of writing to show people that I had the chops to be an author, and in doing so, I sort of wrote a really bad book. Um, so with An Enchantment of Ravens, I was sort of like, okay, this book, I'm just gonna have fun with this book. Like I'm just gonna like make it, like funny and kind of silly and goofy. I think I actually my working title was Fairy Garbage. Like, like giving myself permission to be like messy, was kind of what I needed to kind of get out of that like overly serious mindset. And it really worked. I sort of wrote that book like I was writing in a diary almost. I sort of was like approaching it with the mindset that um, no one would have to read it if I didn't want them to. I could keep it a total secret from the world if I wanted to. And so that helped me sort of overcome that like inner critic that was really hindering me with my first work. And yeah, it seemed to pay off because the response from agents for that one was much better. And I did eventually sign with my agent, Sarah Megabo, which interestingly, she was one of the agents to send me a form rejection for my previous book.
Oh, ain't that just the way?
Yeah, yeah. It was funny. Yeah. And then when I told her that, she was like, "Oh, I should probably take a second look at that book just in case we do want to revisit it." And so I sent it to her. I was like, "Okay." And she read it and she was like, "No, you're right. It's terrible."
That's a very like common occurrence for writers. Like I think because it's kind of like that like idiom of like the first time you do anything, like it's not going to be good, great, or even necessarily good because you're learning so much about the process like the first time you're doing it. So I feel like the first book you write is always a kind of experiment, and it's really cool if it does become like something more. But even if not, I feel like so much of it is just like learning how to write, like beginning, middle, end, and like proving to yourself that you can finish it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good point. The way I felt about it was I felt like I had climbed a mountain and then I knew that I could do it again because I had already
Mm.
climbed it once before. So yeah, I approached my next book with this sort of idea of like, I know I can do this. I know I can finish a book. Um, and yeah, you're so right. It is even if that book never gets published, it was not a waste of time. I don't really look back on it as being a waste of time. Yeah.
It's just a learning experience. It's like a college course. You get through to the end and you've taken a lot out of it. Will you necessarily use it again? Like the papers that you wrote in that class? Not necessarily, but it's a stepping point.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that because that's exactly how I sort of conceptualized the process of writing that book. It was almost like taking an invisible class, like while the people around me were going to like med school to become a nurse, I was training to become a writer. And kind of the hard thing about it is it's sort of invisible. And if nothing comes of it, people may not really take you very seriously. They're like, oh, you're just wasting your time. But it really is like you're training, like you're taking classes, but you're just doing it on your own, kind of alone in silence.
Sometimes that's how the best learning happens, though. And I,
Yeah.
because I feel like, especially on like when you're first kind of learning like the ins and outs of novel writing, like sometimes you need that not to be seen, like for your own growth. I feel like I would
Hmm.
never want anyone to look at like the first book I ever wrote at this point because it was so bad. Like I was passionate about it and I learned so much from it, but looking back on it now as I've grown up as a writer, I'm like, "Oh yeah, no wonder."
Oh yeah, it was definitely a little bit mortifying having my agent read that book for sure.
I'm sure it
I
was.
was like, okay, I mean, it was pretty bad. Yep. But at least I did warn Sarah in advance what she was getting into. So
Well, she didn't go in blind then. Someone
yeah. Plus, I mean, she's read a lot of bad stuff. It's her job to read things,
Mhm.
and I mean, even now, a lot of the stuff that I produce isn't very good, isn't publishable. So yeah, she's been through it with me for sure.
Like that happens, and I feel like you never know what's publishable and what's not until you give it a shot. So nothing wrong with that. Someone in chat named Sorcery of Tomes said Sorcery of Thorns is my favorite book of all time. That's where I got my username from. So
Oh,
I just thought that was sweet and wanted to share. Someone
that is.
else. Oh, sorry, sorry.
Oh no, it's truly an honor. Sometimes people name their cat Silas after Silas from the book. Yeah, so whenever someone names their username or yeah, it's a huge honor.
So, oh my gosh, a cat named Silas would be so perfect too. Oh. Someone else asked, after having grown as a writer, how do you handle your inner critic now?
Oh, it is a constant battle, honestly. Earlier in my career, I truly thought I would reach a point where I could just silence my inner critic and that I would become super confident in my writing. That has never happened. I almost feel like, yeah, I almost feel like the more I write, the less confident I get in my writing. And that inner
Mm.
critic never goes away. It's a lifelong battle, I think. And that's actually, I think, pretty normal. A lot of the authors I've spoken to have the same problem. Um, I think that the more you learn about writing, the more you can see the flaws in your own work. So your self-confidence is just continually taking a hit as you improve as a writer. You just sort of, your your inner critic just kind of keeps pace with you.
Yeah. I feel like it's like that saying, like, the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know. Uh,
Yeah.
the better you get, the more hyper aware you get of like potential issues that there could be. Whether or not they are necessarily there is another matter, but makes you question everything.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Someone else asked, do you have beta readers or do you work mainly with an agent or editor after finishing a first draft?
Sometimes I have worked with beta readers before, in the sense that I'll send my work to a friend or a fellow author. But I am really, really, really cagey about sending my first drafts to people.
Mm.
I think because of that inner critic, I have a really hard time writing a draft if I have the knowledge in the back of my mind that someone's going to read this version of the story. And that slows me down and trips me up a lot. So I typically only send my work to people after I've had a chance to edit it some, and that includes my agent and my editor, ironically. Um, but yeah, I have occasionally exchanged my work with beta readers, and I need to do that more. I think that's something I really need to do more because I haven't really taken advantage of that enough, and I think it's a fantastic thing to do as a writer. I just need to be more courageous.
It's it's such a hard step to take because like having someone else see like any potential flaws is very like nerve-wracking, especially once you've spent so much time and effort on it and you've done the best you can to like make it great. And so hearing someone like point out, yeah, I didn't really jive with this part or what happened here, it can be rough.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, as a writer, because like so much of your self-worth is tied up in your work in a way that is not true of any other job or any job that's not creative. So yeah, so putting your work out there is really putting yourself out there. It truly feels like that. So
Oh yeah,
the
especially
mortifying ordeal, sorry.
oh no, not at all. I was just gonna say, especially the more of yourself and the more of the things you like or feel that you put into your book. And if those things get like critiqued, it almost can feel like a critique on yourself sometimes. Even though that's not the case, it's hard not to feel that way sometimes.
Hmm. Yeah, it is such an irony because I think that as creatives, we do our best writing when we are extremely vulnerable on the page and like really put ourselves into the work. But then, of course, that also sets you up for that experience of just yeah.
It's it's so hard.
Writing sucks. That's the
Right?
moral of this
Writing is
podcast.
hard. Writing sucks. Getting feedback hard.
Eternal suffering and agony.
All right, that's the moral of today's episode. I think we're done here. Sorcery of Tomes has two questions. Recently, many YA authors have begun writing in the adult genre. Is this something that you see in your cards for the future? Also, any news on the Vespertine sequel?
Um, So yeah, the phenomenon of YA authors, and let me know if I break up at all. I think I might have had a little internet glitch right there for a second. So let
Oh,
me know if I sound strange in any way. Um, but yeah, that's actually been a huge conversation in the industry. I feel like almost every YA author that I know has been transitioning to adult. I am personally not doing that myself. I might in the future, but I have no concrete plans to do so. I think I'm pretty happy in the YA space right now, um, particularly now that I've somewhat taken a step back from social media, because I think YA can be a little tough when it comes to social media, but I found that you don't really have to be super active. It's kind of an illusion, I think, that as a YA author, you're obligated to constantly be on Instagram or, those other ones that we shall not name. Um, and I think, I found that not to be true. Yeah. So, I think one of the reasons why I wanted to be an author was to write for young people because when I needed books the most, I was a teenager. That was the time in my life when I really needed books the most. And so I sort of see it as passing it forward in a sense and writing for, those kind of lonely, weird 14, 15-year olds. That means a lot to me to be in that demographic. Um, but yeah, I do think that I could sort of easily transition over into the kind of like somewhat crossovery type stuff, like like Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, for example. That strikes me as something that is the sort of thing that teenagers could certainly read and enjoy, and I would have really enjoyed the age that, I currently write for. So, yeah, so I don't think it's totally out of the question that I might dip my toes into adult fantasy at some point. I hope that was what the question was originally. I totally forgot.
Yes, that was it. That was it exactly. And they also asked, is there any news on the Vespertine sequel?
Mm. So that was originally planned to be a trilogy, actually. But as I started writing it, the pandemic hit, uh, and I got super depressed. I was having like major mental health issues. So we unfortunately just scaled it back to a standalone. Um, there were originally more books planned, but it was tough because the publishing schedule got really crazy. Um, in an ideal world, we would have pushed back the publication date, but we couldn't do that. So I actually finished writing the book like 4 months before it was published,
Oh,
which, if you know anything about the way YA schedules work, that's insane.
wow.
Like, that never happens. Or maybe like 5 months before, but literally like right before arcs were printed, that like the day before I had like turned in the manuscripts. Like, it was insane and it was awful, and everybody was super stressed out, and it was not a great experience. And yeah, with all that going on, it didn't really make sense to work on the sequel. Partly because I was already so behind. Like, ideally, when you have a series come out, by the time the first one comes out, you should have at least started the sequel, right? Um, for the scheduling to work out. And yeah, I hadn't done that. So yeah, it's unfortunately a standalone for now, which is tough because I felt like in a lot of ways Vespertine was the character's like origin story. Uh, and the next couple books were going to really expand on the world and the lore, and some of the moments that I was building up to were going to happen in those books that I was really looking forward to. But alas, publishing doesn't always work out the way we want it to. And
Well, I think it's good to also give yourself the freedom to be like, these were truly like lifetime changing events that like very rarely happen. Like it was completely understandable to be feeling that way and not be as on top of things as you wanted. I think I'm so jealous of all the writers who said they got so much writing done during the pandemic because meanwhile
I know.
I was like, how? How do you have a single brain cell to spare that's not like just drowning in like sadness?
Oh, I
So,
know. Same here. I feel like there's like two types of authors. The kind that you mentioned who were like, "Oh yeah, I wrote like 5 books. It was great." And then like me and possibly you, like quivering in a
Oh
corner
yeah.
like a terrified chihuahua. Like you know, like I like yeah, totally I could not write a single thing for like months. It was awful.
Yeah, and like the whole like isolation, like just being trapped in your home and not being able to like go out or get any kind of like real interactions. Like there was no like stimulation that made me even, I don't know, feel like I wanted to write. Like I feel like it's hard when you're
Yeah.
just isolated like that.
Yeah, spot on. I remember there was at one point when I was writing Vespertine when I realized I couldn't picture human facial expressions because I hadn't interacted with a human being in real life for like literally months. And I was like, yeah, that was just awful. I felt like while I was writing that book, I genuinely felt like I was like an alien, like pretending like writing about humans. I was like, okay, now the human would smile, right? The human would smile. The human would bare its mouth teeth in a sign of pleasure. Oh my God, it was awful.
You, I don't remember the name of it. Do you know that webcomic of like aliens who are like learning about the human
Oh yeah,
world? My favorite one
it
is
was.
the characters are fictional. My anger is real, however. It just reminds me of that so much.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's like exactly. Yeah.
So do you want to talk about like your full publication journey and then talk about your books individually, or do you want to talk about your books individually and then kind of talk about how you got from one to the next?
Honestly, whatever you think would be more interesting.
Well, I feel like let's go chronological. So we'll start with
Okay.
you already mentioned An Enchantment of Ravens. So I still think it's
Yeah,
so funny
yeah.
that the working title was very garbage.
Yeah, so I'm kind of like infamous. I'll actually like as I go, I'll tell you, but I'm infamous for not being able to title my own books. Um,
It's so
so yeah, it's really hard. So in Enchantment of Ravens, I think I left off where I got an agent.
hard.
Um, and then it went on submission. It actually sold quite quickly, I think within like a month or so.
That is fast.
Yeah. Yeah, it was quite fast. I received offers from Simon and Schuster and Random House, and I ended up going with Simon and Schuster.
Can I can
And
I
it was a
kind
two,
can I kind of ask, because I don't think a lot of our viewers are super familiar with kind of the process. Like how did that happen
oh
when
yeah,
you
okay.
had like two offers? Like what was kind of the process for that?
Yeah, so my agent basically submitted it to a bunch of different YA editors. And she kept me up to date on sort of generally what the responses were. So some editors just passed on it. Some editors were like, "Oh, I love it, but I don't think I could take it to acquisitions," which is acquisitions is like when they take it to a meeting with you know, the executive editor of the imprint, and they kind of present it and make an argument for it, and it gets approved or rejected in that meeting. Um, so I think maybe I don't know if mine ever went to acquisitions with anyone other than Simon and Schuster and Random House, but yeah, it definitely got sort of like polite, like, "Oh, I love this book, but I don't think that it would get through acquisitions," kind of messages. And then the two editors who ended up offering on it did not have to take it to acquisitions because they were both executive editors, so they're allowed to basically just do whatever they want. Um,
I mean, that's great then,
so
because it's a sign that your book
yeah.
is like that good that it doesn't even have to go through acquisitions. They're just like, yeah, we'll do it.
Yeah, I mean, it was lucky. It was fortuitous for sure that it landed on the desks of those particular editors, and they liked it enough to make offers on it. Um, so I got offers from both of them, and they were pretty equivalent. And I just chose I hopped on the phone with both of the editors, and we had a phone call, and they kind of talked about their vision for the book and all of that stuff. And I guess I just chose based on just vibes. I was just like, okay, yeah, I think this editor, I think I would work a little bit better with her. You know, our styles seem like they would mesh a little bit better. So we went with the Simon and Schuster offer. And that was that. I've actually been with that same editor for the rest of my career. I'm currently writing a book for that editor.
So, a sign that it was a good choice. I know you mentioned like going off of vibes, but I feel like that's so important because I feel like if you are working with someone, whether it be an agent or an editor, and they don't have like the same vision or like taste in books as you, like that can be very hard. And you never want to end up like butting heads and having different visions for where the book is going. So, I feel like
Hmm.
vibes are valid.
Yeah, that's a really good point because I think I remember what it was like to be an author in the trenches querying agents. And there was a point where I was sort of like so desperate that I almost would have accepted any offer just out of sheer desperation. And that would have been a terrible idea because I think if you have any doubts at the back of your mind that this agent or this editor doesn't quite understand your work, never ever sign with them, even if you're desperate, because I feel like whenever that happens, the outcome is always just so difficult.
Yeah. Because if someone likes your work, but then they want you to change everything about it, then it's kind of like, well, do you really like my work? And then do you want to keep working with that person when what they want for you and your work is not what you want?
Yeah, yeah. Even if what they're asking for is like major revisions, it should be revisions that you are 100% on board with, you know, that you think
Mm.
match your own vision for what you want to do with that book. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So because Enchantment of Ravens was originally tiled fairy garbage, is that like is the idea of writing about fairies like what kind of started the idea for that book, or what was kind of the first starting point that you had for it?
Oh, that's a great question. I totally skipped over that. So this is a funny story actually. So, you know, I mentioned, you know, after the first book didn't turn out so well, I was in the shower one morning and I was like, okay, I've got to come up with an idea for another book. The querying is really hard, so I need something to keep my mind off of it. And the best thing to do in that situation is to write another book and to kind of put all your hopes and dreams into this new project so that when you're getting rejections for the old one, it's not as hard because you're sort of over it already in a sense, you know what I mean? Um,
Yeah.
so I was in the shower and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna squash together two things that I really like a lot, that I love and I feel really passionate about. So I was like, okay, what are two things that I'm really passionate about? One of them is art. In high school, I did portrait art. So I was like, okay, I can write about that really well. And then the other thing that I like is like fairy folklore, like old school type fairy folklore, where the fairies are like really creepy and strange and kind of inhuman. And I was like, I'm just gonna mash those two things together. And then instantly, it was like kind of like being struck by lightning, and I had all these ideas suddenly, kind of like rolling through my brain. So I ran out of the shower naked and ran to get a notebook and a pen. It was just like scribbling down all my ideas, just like dripping all over the floor. And I probably just completely disturbed my neighbors for life. Um,
Why do all the
but
best
yeah,
ideas come while you're in the shower? Why is that?
I know it is a real phenomenon, or like literally the moment you're falling asleep.
Yes. Oh my God, that's the one
Yeah,
I
those
always get.
yeah, those are the two best times, and you should never ever tell yourself, "Oh, I'll remember this later," because you won't.
You never do. I always have to like get I just have so many random nonsensical notes on my notes app on my phone because I'll just be like half asleep. I'll pull it up and I'll be like, then they all fell asleep. And then I look at it the next morning and I'm like, what was I trying to convey here? Like this doesn't make any
Oh
sense.
yeah, I do the exact same thing. Sometimes it's just like one word. It's like sauce. And you're like, what does that mean?
What were you trying to tell me, brain?
Oh gosh.
So I'm really curious because I feel like there are so many like depictions of fairy in YA media right now, especially like in the last couple of years. How I'm not as like very familiar with fairy lore. I'm curious about how you approached writing it. Like, did you try to keep every single piece of the lore, or did you ever like bend some of the lore to better fit the story? I was curious how you approached that.
I really decided to just pick and choose and just do whatever I wanted. But um, the thing that has always really interested me about fairies and any kind of supernatural being, really like vampires or what have you, is the idea that they live by a strict set of rules and they cannot break those rules. And that's what makes supernatural creatures really interesting to me. Because I feel like in folklore, there are always rules.
Hmm.
Um, and so with fairies, the I think the foundational rule for me was this idea of craft that fairies cannot create anything. So they can't write, they can't paint, they can't bake bread, and they depend on trading enchantments to humans in exchange for those things. And where that idea originally came from was actually pretty interesting. It's this piece of mythology that you can protect yourself from fairies with bread. I know, right? It's so interesting.
It
So
makes me curious. How did that come about? Why bread of all things?
yeah, yeah. So like if you're gonna walk out into the woods, for example, you put a piece of bread in your pocket and the fairies can't touch you. And I think I first stumbled across that idea referenced in a book called The Folk Keeper by Fran Billingsley. It's a little known book, but it's really good. And the idea behind it, to my understanding, is that it's this idea that fairies are these wild beings of nature, and bread sort of being associated with the human hearth and human domestication of wheat is um, sort of anathema to fairies because it is this domination of nature or this taming of nature that is really antithetical to their nature. Um, and I just thought that was really interesting, and I thought it was something that I had not really seen taken to the fullest possible um, conclusion before in fairy mythology. So I decided to sort of take that idea and say, okay, I'm going to apply it to everything that's sort of human, right? Um, like painting, music, sewing. Fairies can't do any of that because that's like a human kind of a mortal pursuit. And if they try to do it, they like literally crumble to dust because they're not meant to be. They're creatures of wild nature, and they're not meant to be doing anything like that.
I just love that. And I love how much the fairy lore like really shaped and developed the entire world that they lived in. I thought it was just so fascinating how much like their kind of backstory and like the rules that come with their mythological being like really affected literally everything around them.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I love the rules because that's just I don't know, I find fairies a bit boring if they don't have to follow rules. If they can just
Mm.
lie, if they can just if they can touch iron, if I just feel like I want that weakness in them, that vulnerability to kind of balance out their power. I just feel like that balance is really interesting.
Yeah, I feel like it's when you read a really good, thoughtful magic system. Like, it's no fun if there are no rules to the magic and everyone's just like slinging fire and lightning around. Like, it's way more interesting if there are set rules and limitations because it doesn't mean, oh, anyone can do anything at any point. Like, they have to work within constraints. And to me, that's just so much more interesting than no rules. Anyone can do whatever they want.
Yeah, agreed, absolutely.
So, this was the first book you wrote after your first attempt at writing a book and getting all of those query rejections. Was it difficult for you to write another book after all of that? Like, I'm sure you must have had like so much kind of feeling of self-doubt. Like, what was the hardest part of writing this book for you coming off of that?
So I signed a two-book deal with my publisher for An Enchantment of Ravens plus another unspecified standalone. And that was on one hand, I mean, amazing to have that security of knowing that I had another book under contract. On the other hand, it was the most anxiety-inducing thing that's ever happened to me. Um, because I didn't have another idea for a book yet. It all happened pretty fast, and I hadn't started working on anything else, and I didn't have an idea for anything else. So I spent the next basically year and a half in a state of like intense anxiety because I didn't have an idea, right? I was just like, I remember going to see a movie once and I walked out of the movie theater. Literally, I didn't even know what had happened in the movie because I had spent the whole movie sitting there like, oh my God, what am I going to do for my next book?
That's so
It was awful. So I wrote a few things during that time. I mentioned to you in emails that I've written some real, I don't know, what shall we call them? Some abominations. I've written some really bad manuscripts. So I did write a couple of things during that time, but they were really bad, and I could feel in my gut that they were really bad, like they weren't publishable. So that of course just made my anxiety like 10 times worse. Um, and then I ended up kind of doing the same thing that I did in the shower that morning, where when I came up with the idea for An Enchantment of Ravens, I was like, I think this was a few months before before an Enchantment was published, and I was like, okay, I've got to come up with something. I can't, have my debut come out and I still haven't started the next book in my contract. So I was like, Margaret, you're just gonna come up with something right now. And I was like, okay, the two things, what are two more things that I feel really passionate about that I really love? And I was like, books. I love books, right? I love books. Like the easiest possible answer. So I was like, okay, and I love books and I love magic. So I
two great
was like, magical books. Yeah, all right, I'm gonna do magical books. And from there I sort of developed the idea of the great libraries, and I had this kind of image of, okay, so if you have a library that exclusively houses magical books, then you're going to need some kind of special librarian, right, to contain the books. So I had this mental image of a librarian with a sword, and everything kind of grew around that basic premise. Uh, and Yeah, so that was how sorcery came about. And I mentioned earlier that I'm infamously bad at titling my books. So when I started this project, its working title until my publisher got really tired of me and named it for me was was the Magic Library book, and
it's
that was its title.
working draft titles aren't necessarily as important, but gosh, are they hard. I remember when I published my first book, my editor and I went back and forth, and we just neither of us could come up with a name. We had like probably a list of like 100 possible titles. It I feel like the title is probably the hardest part of writing a book. It's impossible.
Oh yeah, you go through that phase where you're like slinging just random words at each other in emails like spaghetti, trying to like stick to the walls. You're just like, okay, okay, and I swear that's how those titles get made that are like Court of Bones and Ashes or like Crown of Blood and Thorns, and of course my books kind of fall into the same pattern. Um, but yeah, that's totally just like the editor and like the marketing team just kind of like throwing spaghetti around.
I think whoever did the final say on your titles is so good because I feel like they encapture such a sense of magic as well as being relevant to like the contents of the book. So I love them.
Mhm.
Ultimately, they're great.
Yeah, no, they absolutely work. Sorcery of Thorns was actually really funny because at the time that we named it, the book didn't really have like a thorn motif. There was just it was just one of the characters' last names. So Nathaniel Thorne is the name of the love interest. And I was sort of like, okay, but like he's just the love interest. So I guess I have to like go back in during edits and add more thorns to the title mix. So
That's so
so
funny.
I know, right? So like there was this scene, like minor spoiler, I'll try to be vague, but there's a duel, like a sorcerer's duel scene where like Nathaniel summons a bunch of thorns, and that was something that I put in to kind of try to justify the title.
I mean, I feel like it's fitting. So even though it was something you added retroactively, I feel like it worked out.
Yeah, no, it did. It worked great. I mean, I think it was great of them to, I mean, the fact that they came up with that title, I think made me go back and sharpen the, no pun intended, the like the themes a little bit, I suppose.
Oh, well, love it when everything just happens to work out in the end. Someone asked, this was a little while ago while we were talking about magic and rule systems and magical creatures who can't break, like magical laws. Is that desire to set up rules that powerful beings have to follow part of the inspiration behind the demons, such as Silas?
Yes, I feel like every single book I write in perpetuity is going to have some kind of supernatural creature who lives by some kind of limiting, kind of imposing rules. So Silas is that character in Sorcery of Thorns and the demons in general. I actually came up with the magic system in Sorcery of Thorns specifically to facilitate like Silas as a character and the relationship that I wanted him to have with Nathaniel. So yeah, for sure that came into play too with the demons.
The character relationships in Sorcery of Thorns are some of my favorite across just all fiction. They are so, so good. And oh, I wanted to ask, like, how do you write like such good chemistry between characters? Like there's so much good banter, there's so much like underneath the surface that's not explicitly said, but you can like tell from the way characters act with one another. How did you kind of go about developing those within the book?
I wish I knew so that I could do it more easily. So in truthfully though, I I don't always succeed at that. I actually fail at achieving that a lot of the time. And I sort of have this sense that for when I write a book, when I write a manuscript, that gut feeling that I have regarding whether or not it's working or not often comes down to the chemistry. Like, is the chemistry there or is it not there?
Mm.
Um, and a lot of the time it's not. I mean, I've written almost entire manuscripts where the relationship there just didn't really have that spark. Um, I think though that one thing that helps is creating the dynamic that you want to have before actually creating the characters, if that makes sense. So you say to yourself like, okay, I want this dynamic that's kind of like Sophie and Howl in Howl's Moving Castle. And how am I going to achieve that dynamic and achieve that chemistry and humor? Um, and then you create the characters to be foils for each other. So rather than coming up with two individual characters and kind of trying to squish them together, you come up with dynamic first and then develop the characters to suit that dynamic.
That's so interesting. I've never thought about it that way. I just know as soon as Nathaniel came in and he immediately started teasing Elizabeth and the continuation of that kind of back and forth banter, I just fell in love with them so quickly. They were just so
Yeah,
cute.
yeah, I will say with Nathaniel, he just kind of opened his mouth and like said whatever he wanted to say. I felt like I was just kind of along for the ride. Like his dialogue sometimes just kind of like literally wrote itself.
Oh, one of our viewers said, the romance feels so real and organic. From all of humanity, thank you for the window seat scene. I was blushing and kicking my feet the whole time.
Aw. I'm so glad you liked that. And actually, my editor deserves some credit here because that scene was originally like a lot shorter. And when she was going through making editorial notes, she was like, okay, Margaret, make this scene longer, more kissing. And so I did. And that's why it's so good.
Oh, your editor has an amazing eye.
I know, right? She definitely always gets me to write more kissing for sure.
I mean, I'm not going to
Fans
complain
across
about it.
I know, right? Oh yeah, it's the right call. She knows what she's doing.
So I'm curious about there are just so many like interesting ideas and characters and like magic systems. Like there's so much that's so cool about A Sorcery of Thorns. I was wondering if you had like a favorite part of it or something that you found like the most compelling when you were writing it.
Oh, that's an interesting question. Um, I think Silas's character for me was the part of the book that really was sort of the as I write, I think of myself as a donkey chasing a carrot on a stick, and Silas was my carrot. Uh, yeah, like there's a scene, I don't want to spoil it if anyone has not read the book, but there's a scene where something happens to him and he sort of comes back. And that scene was the one that I was really looking forward to writing throughout like the whole process. I was really looking forward to getting to that scene.
It's a good
Um,
moment.
yeah, that was definitely probably my favorite part in the book, I would say.
That's really cool. Was your love of like writing Silas, did that carry over into inspiring Vespertine next? Because I feel like uh the demon in that book had very similar like kind of style and characteristics and sassiness. So I'm
Hmm.
curious, like, is that something that kind of carried over like your fascination with that kind of character? Did that inspire your next book, or was the inspiration something else?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I really just write about one thing. I write about like the relationship between humans and supernatural entities. That I am a one-note author, and that's just how I am. So, uh, yeah, I definitely think it was in the same, The Revenant was in the same vein as Silas, in the sense that I just really enjoy writing sort of inhuman characters who have interesting relationships with humans, whether that's, sometimes it's romantic, sometimes it's not. Uh, but I think that that's just a dynamic that I really enjoy writing, and it's kind of a character type that I really enjoy writing. I would say if you go back to even An Enchantment of Ravens, you can sort of see that character type a little bit in Gadfly.
Oh, yeah.
He's sort of that character in that book. Like there's always that character kind of in my books in some form or another. Um, Although maybe not the one that I'm writing right now, which is interesting.
Ooh. I'll wait until the end to ask if you can give us any hints or foreshadowing of what you're working on. But someone in
Okay.
chat said we simply must know Vespertine's working title.
Oh, so that one actually was just Vespertine, amazingly, and they did not change it.
That's nice when like the first thing that you come up with is what happens to stick, and it's great.
Yeah, yeah. I kind of think, like everything was so chaotic during the pandemic that they were just like, okay, yeah, let's just go with that.
No, I think it's a very fitting title, and it sounds like super cool, which is fitting because it's
Hmm.
I don't know, like I feel like it has that sense of like adventure that the characters go on. So I feel like you just got it right the first time. Sometimes it does happen, and you
Yeah,
did it.
yeah. I'm glad they stuck with it. I did really like the title.
Yeah. So to kind of go back to The Revenant, I was curious, like, what were some of the challenges of writing? Actually, I guess, do you want to give like a brief summary of what Vespertine is about for anyone here who might not know before I ask this question? 'Cause without context, I
Yeah.
feel like it's gonna sound insane.
Yes, okay. So forgive me, it's been a while since I've pitched this book, so I'm a little rusty, but it is about a girl named Artemisia who is training to be a nun in a world where the dead do not rest. If their spirits are not consecrated by nuns, essentially, they will rise as spirits. Um, and when and So some of these spirits are not really dangerous. Some of them are very dangerous, depending on the way the person died. Um, and they are in this setting, the magic system is based on binding those spirits to saints' relics, which then allows you to wield the power of that particular spirit. So if it was a spirit of someone who died, for example, in a fire, binding that spirit to a saint's relic and wielding it will allow you to wield the power of fire. at this particular convent in their crypt, they have an extremely powerful relic to which the revenant is bound. Um, and when the convent is attacked by possessed soldiers, Artemisia takes up that relic. She's forced to take up that relic and defend her convent. And she ends up in this very fraught relationship with the revenant, where it's sort of like the way I pitched this book, and I cannot believe they ran with this, was Venom meets Joan of Arc. I I cannot believe they actually used that pitch.
I mean,
Bananas.
I feel like it just sounds so crazy that like how could you not be intrigued? Like I want to see
Yeah,
what
and
that looks like.
yeah, it really does. It pretty much is what the book is too. So Artemisia, the Revenant kind of speaks in Artemisia's head. It's her, her sort of guide, but it's also she's very suspicious of it because it's supposed to be very evil and very dangerous and might possess her at any moment. But they grudgingly become allies and go on to be very close friends. It's almost like a romance without the kissing. It's like I consider them to be sort of soulmates, right? Um, yeah.
That's so
So yeah.
romantic.
So
That's such a romantic way of
yeah.
looking at it. Aw. So the question I wanted to ask, which I felt needed like the context of everything you just said, I was curious about what some of the challenges were with writing two characters kind of sharing one body, and especially when it comes to like communication, because there's no body language there. Like, what did you like struggle with that, and how did you kind of overcome that and still get this sense of like two separate characters who are communicating without having two separate bodies?
Yeah, that's actually that was probably the biggest challenge initially was this realization as soon as I introduced the Revenant, like, oh my God, so one of the two main characters of this book does not have a body or a physical form that Artemisia can even see. It's just this disembodied presence that lives inside her body and her head and talks to her. And I hadn't realized until I got to that part of the book how much I previously had relied on physicality to um to develop a character, right? Like how much of the character isn't just their dialogue, but also their body language. And that was actually really hard. Um, yeah, I eventually, I think I just got around it by relying very heavily on dialogue and also on the physical expression of the revenant within Artemisia's body, right? So there's this idea that it could possess her at any time. It can sort of wrest control of parts of her body. So if it doesn't want her to go somewhere, for example, it might exert itself against her and kind of try to physically, she can't move because the revenant's kind of, stopping her. Or it can, take control of her arm and raise her arm or, things of that nature. Um, and that actually turned out to be really fun. It was a challenge, but it was a really fun challenge that I think was very rewarding because I think it led to this dynamic that was so interesting and really played into that tension of, oh, is the revenant going to possess her or is it helping her or what's going on? um and that was really fun. It was really fun.
That sounds like it. And what a cool way to like really learn about characters and have them like convey emotions and like even motivations without being able to like have that body language as not necessarily a crutch, but like a very like helping tool. Like what a cool way to like really get into someone's head and learn about them.
Yeah, like one example, and this is just a minor spoiler, over the course of the book, um, when Artemisia is working with the Revenant, she starts having a physiological reaction to the dark, and she finds out after a while that the Revenant is afraid of the dark, and its sort of fear is making her have sort of an anxiety response. So yeah, that's just an example of how it kind of manifests, you know, mentally and physically. It was just, yeah, it was a blast to write.
I love that. Still with the Revenant, like, what were kind of the challenges of like, because they start off like so, it's not polarizing, but quite uh enemies. They start off pretty,
Hmm.
what's the word? Antagonistic towards each other. What were kind
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
challenges with developing their relationship to the point where they became close friends? Like, how did you kind of go about writing that journey?
A good question. So I wanted it to be sort of apparent to the audience, but not to Artemisia, that the Revenant actually was kind of trying to help her from the very beginning in a very sort of like nasty and begrudging way. But it did actually from the beginning kind of see in her that she had been abused and that she was a very um, sort of traumatized person, and it felt bad for her. So Artemisia couldn't perceive that, but I hope that the audience kind of started to get that feeling from the beginning, because I sort of perceive myself as a writer of comfort books, and with Artemisia being a really traumatized character who struggled very severely with anxiety and trauma, I wanted it to sort of be apparent from the beginning that she was going to receive the help and support that she needed, even though she felt very alone internally. So I sort of approached it from that perspective, which is that I wanted the dynamic between them to be sort of like nasty and like bickering enough that that tension was there. That sort of threat that the Revenant might possess her seemed legitimate for her to have. But you could also see, oh man, I think the Revenant might actually like care about her, you know? Um, and like and kind of that additional tension of like, when is she going to realize that? Like, when is she going to figure this out, that the Revenant actually does kind of care about her? And when is the Revenant going to like grudgingly admit that? You know, that's going to be like a great moment, right?
Yeah.
So that was kind of the tension that I was working with as well.
Oh, it's so good. I love how subtly you write and develop character relationships, like whether they be romantic, platonic. Like I think you have such like a good way of just organically showing and making readers believe like, yeah, of course these two like eventually came to rely on and care about each other. Like it just makes total sense. And I think that's like a really amazing skill.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So we did have some pre-submitted questions from chat. So let me go ahead and ask you some of them. So your characters often seem to grapple with identity and self-worth. Are these themes you intentionally aim to include, or do they emerge more organically?
Hmm, that's an interesting question. I think that sometimes they're deliberate and sometimes they're organic. Um, with Artemisia, certainly it was very deliberate. I knew what I was doing with that. Um, Although I will say, when the first drafts of Vespertine, I hadn't quite figured that out about Artemisia yet. For her character, I felt sort of like I was like a wildlife photographer staking out like the den of a snow leopard who like literally never came out of the cave. And I was like sleeping out in the cold and I was sleeping out in the rain, like waiting for this snow leopard to just like put its tail out the cave, maybe, so I could just like take a photo of something. Um, and yeah, so the breakthrough with her character was realizing, oh, she's really traumatized. She's been through something really bad. And that's what's going on with her. So yeah, that was deliberate, but it did take a while for me to figure. Um, with my other characters, I wouldn't say Isabel was super struggled with self-worth. Elizabeth does a little bit, sort of struggling with finding her place, you know, growing up wanting to be a warden, idolizing the wardens, and then realizing that they're sort of like cops, being like, "Oh, maybe not." And then kind of grappling with like what, you know, what that means, and um, you know, she's a breaker of chains, not a, you know, not the person wielding them.
That's
But
such
yeah,
an
I
amazing
think
way
I
of
think
putting it.
maybe Yeah, I think that in writing for young people, uncertainty, self-worth, doubts are just sort of themes that I feel are very relevant. They're things that I struggled with as a teen, so I think they maybe just make their way into things that I write just for that reason.
And I feel like that makes sense, especially because the audience is also young adults. And I think all of us, whether we're open about it or not, felt very similar struggles with not knowing like where our place was or feeling out of place and having that kind of identity crisis and not knowing who we are, what we want to do, and feeling insecure about it. So I think it's very,
Mhm.
very fitting, especially for that age.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Uh, We had another question that was, how do you approach world building when coming up with the history of the world and how it impacts the characters in their journey?
Ooh. So I would say with my first ever manuscript that I tried to write, I came up with a world building first, and I had this super detailed like document full of like, okay, here's all the names of the cities, and here's all the the details of the magic system and everything. And that actually ended up being an impediment to me because I felt like I was writing the characters and the plot to fit the world and not the other way around. And that I had so much world building, I had to kind of find a way to shoehorn it in. Um, and ever since then, what I try to do is I try to come up with the characters and sort of a general idea of the plot before I really go too deep into world building. And then as I develop, the kinds of conflicts that I want these characters to face in their relationships and in their personal growth, um, I tailor the world around those things to to meet the needs of the plot and to meet the needs of the character arcs rather than creating it in advance. So I'll start with an idea like say with Sorcery of Thorns where I'm like, okay, I'm going to have magical libraries and I want the setting to feel sort of like Dickens era, like early Victorian. And then beyond that, I sort of just went with I started developing the characters and the plot, and then I kind of, slapped on bits of world building as I went along to kind of fit, what I needed. Like, I knew, Nathaniel was going to have a troubled past, he was going to have some kind of a shady ancestor who did necromancy, so I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna create this, like, this war that happened," and, you know, I kinda just yeah, I do it a bit as I go along, with the outline.
I feel like that's such a like good way of doing it so that everything feels natural because I think when you do it that way also like you start to mention a lot of like the magic as it relates to like what's currently happening. So you never feel like you're info dumping. It's just like, "Oh, this is relevant right now." And it creates like a puzzle almost when you're doing it piece by piece. And by the time you get to the end, you're like, "Oh, okay, I see what I need. Now I can go back and edit it so that it's more consistent all the way across."
Mm. Yeah, revealing information, world building information is one of the hardest things about writing fantasy without info dumping. It is hard. It is really hard.
It's so hard. And then there are ideas you have that like you want to include, but it doesn't really make sense for this story and these characters. So even though you have like this idea of like this whole other aspect of the world existing and you know all these details about it, because it's never directly relevant, it's like, well, guess that'll just exist in my head.
Yeah, I had that problem so much with Sorcery of Thorns because it's like a pretty like big world. Like there's a lot of stuff that just didn't make its way into the book or got cut from the book, which actually ended up being super beneficial later on because I did this French special edition that is like a bind up of sorcery and mysteries, and it's the whole thing is annotated in character by Silas. Unfortunately, this is not available in English. It was a French only.
I was just about
I
to
know,
ask. Oh, why do the
I
French
know,
get
but
everything?
I did. Yeah, I did get to include in the annotations like a lot of the details about the world building that just never got included in the book. It was a super fun project. I would love for it to one day get like an English edition, but so far there are no plans for that. But that would be really cool.
What do I have to do to petition for this to happen?
Yeah, first you have to draw a pentagram, 10 years of your life. Um,
Okay, I'll do it. Oh, but I unfortunately think we should probably start nearing the wrap up just because I don't want to keep you for too long, too much of your time. But oh, someone did ask, what does a typical day look like for you?
typically, I am on the floor in the fetal position, crying about how hard writing is. Um, no, it's, I mean, every day is a little bit different, but generally speaking, like the one thing that I try to do is get started writing as early as possible before my brain has kind of woken up, because um, I feel like I can kind of trick myself into not suffering as much if I'm like half conscious. I'm just like, oh, I force myself to just type things, right? And because I find that that first hour or two of writing is the hardest part. And once
Mm.
you've passed that drudgery phase, you kind of get into the flow a little bit and you're like, oh yeah, actually like I like writing. Like this isn't eternal suffering and pain. Like it's fine. But that first hurdle of the first just hour or two is really hard. So I try to just do that as early as I can and just get it over with and just physically make myself write something.
That
And then
that
I
is that so
usually shoot to
relatable.
get, yeah, oh God. Oh, writing.
Writing.
And then sometimes I do end up on the floor in the fetal position. Um, but yeah, yeah, usually I have like a goal, like a word count goal, even if it's something like, okay, I hate writing today, so I'm going to do like 500 words. I feel like the thing that's the most important is just getting something down on the page. It doesn't have to be like 2,000 words of sheer genius. It just has to be something. I mean, who was it? Terry Pratchett, who only wrote 500 words a day, and then he would just stop. And he ended up writing, I mean, how many novels? Dozens of novels in his career. He was super prolific. And that always stuck with me that he only wrote 500 words a day. Like that was his writing day. Um, so yeah, as long as I write something, I feel like I'm moving forward, I'm accomplishing something. I'm a very slow writer.
Same. But I feel like you said, the most important part is getting something down. You can always work with something later. Like if maybe you didn't feel like you wrote something super well, as long as it got you to the next step of the writing and progressed like the actual process of finishing the novel, then as long as you have something you can work with and edit later, then
Hmm.
that's an important step.
Yeah, that is so important. Just getting the darn thing done is the important part, and you can always go back and fix it later. But you can't fix something that's not there.
Yeah. What's that
So
what's
it's
that saying? You can't edit a blank page.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you're just I think one writer, and I unfortunately don't remember who it was, kind of likened the first draft to just heaping up a bunch of sand that you're later going to turn into a sandcastle. But for the first draft, you're just getting that sand, you know? It doesn't have to be pretty. You just need the sand.
It feels so accurate. Something I'm always interested in, because I feel like we very rarely get like to see like kind of behind the scenes like the struggles of a lot of especially successful authors. So I was curious, what has been like the hardest part of writing as a career for you? Like what have you kind of struggled with the most?
Mm, that's a great question. I think for me, the hardest part has been taking what was once my dearest passion and turning it into my job
Oh,
that I have to do to pay my grocery bills. Um, yeah, it, it's yeah, that's the hardest part, I think, because writing has always been the thing that I love doing the most, and it's kind of hard for that to be my job now. Um,
it's a lot of
I think
pressure.
that's why. Sorry, what?
Oh, I was just saying it's a lot of pressure. Like when you take this
Oh,
thing
it
that you
is.
love and you feel like you have to be like incredibly good at it, like good enough to like support yourself, like it becomes like less of a passion and more of like a responsibility. And you can still be passionate about it, but I feel
Yeah.
like there's a lot more weight to it once you reach a certain point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. I think it goes back to too that idea that a creative job is sort of your self-worth is so wrapped up in the content that you produce that, yeah, that can be a bit of a struggle. But I will say, I mean, it is my dream job and I don't regret it for a second. But that is, I think, a reason why a lot of authors give the advice, which is very good advice, that when you get published, you should develop a hobby that has nothing to do with writing. You should get into,
Mm.
gardening or knitting or something that's not writing because you need to have a creative outlet that's not writing.
Yeah, I think that's great advice and very accurate. I feel like you have to have something that you are passionate about that is not connected to what you're doing for a living.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. I'm not very good at that.
Me either.
Oh, we're doing great.
Ah, writing, we say, as we all suffer through it.
Yeah.
So, normally the last two things I like to end our interview on are what is your one piece of advice for authors? And then also asking about like what you're working on currently and if there's something you want to promote.
Okay. My piece of advice, I think that was the best piece of advice that I received as a writer, which was it's okay for your first draft to suck. And that kind of ties in with what we were talking about earlier. But I think that when you have a dream of being an author and you look at your favorite books, you read them and you think, there's no way I could ever write this, right? It seems so beyond anything that you are personally capable of writing. But I think it's really important for writers to keep in mind that the book that you send on submission to agents is not going to be the final book that ends up on the shelf because that book has been edited by professionals. It's had an agent, it's had an editor, it's had a copy editor, a proofreader, beta readers. So you don't have to be writing a book like that to get published or to get a publishing deal or an agent. You just have to write a book that has the potential to become that book. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And I think that's something that we lose sight of so much because we really feel like, like why can't I write something that's as good as the books that are on a bookstore shelves? But the reason is because you aren't really supposed to be able to do that, and agents don't really expect you to do that
Mm.
because those books go through the whole professional process before they reach that stage.
Yeah, at that point,
And that's
probably
something
at least
that,
five or six people have worked on it. So,
mhm. Yeah, yeah. And that's something that when that clicked for me as a writer, I was like, okay, so my book, to get an agent, to get an editor, it doesn't have to be at that level yet. It just has to be good enough to eventually, with a lot of help, get to that level. And that really helped me out a lot to think about.
that's really good advice. Thank you. All right, so I do remember you mentioning you don't often talk much about what you're working on, but you might drop us some hints for some psychological torture, which I am so ready for this torture.
Oh, I do love torturing. So I will share that the book that I'm working on now is another young adult standalone. I'm actually working on multiple projects, but that is the one that I'm currently focusing on, so I'll share that. Um, and the bit of torture that I can reveal is that it is inspired by the classic painting The Meeting on the Turret Stairs, and its working title is Night Book, night with a K, not night as in night and day. And those are the
Hmm.
spoilers that I can reveal.
I had to pull up what this portrait looks like just so I could see.
Did you find it?
I did. Interesting. I don't know what to make of this.
Mm,
This is a very vague hint.
I know, it is vague by design.
Can I ask if you know of any projected timeline for when we might be able to expect hearing more about this mystery book?
I unfortunately do not have anything official to share. I do think that it's very likely to come out next year, but I can't say that that's not official. So nobody put that on Goodreads. Um, but that's kind of yeah, that's kind of when I project, like based on kind of my progress. That's sort of what I'm estimating mentally. But it's not like officially on the books yet, so I can't say for sure.
Okay. Oh, that's so exciting. I can't wait. Oh, speaking of, if you would like to read a tie-in short story to Sorcery of Thorns and Mysteries of Thorn Manor, type exclamation short story in the chat and you will get a link to a short story that Margaret Rogerson wrote and published on AO3. I don't want to give any spoilers about it, just because if you haven't read either of those yet, you absolutely should. But it is excellent and very funny, and features Silas, who we were discussing, and he is amazing as always. So be sure to check that out if you would like. For anyone who's listening on the audio podcast, if you go to Archive of Our Own, I believe it's listed under A Winter's Favor by Mar Rogerson. So be sure to read it. It is excellent. I was so happy to see that there was more official Sorcery of Thorns content out in the world. So yeah, just wanted to give a quick shout out to that.
Oh, thank you. I kind of regard it as author written fan fiction, so it seemed appropriate to post it on AO3. I actually got the idea from Margaret Owen, who's been publishing a series of short stories set in the Little Thieves universe on AO3. And I thought that was a fantastic idea, so I copied her blatantly.
That's just such a fun idea though. Like I love that. Like are at that point is it fan fiction or is it canon because it's the official author writing it? Either way, I love it, but like at that point, which one is it?
I don't even know. It's just such a nebulous gray area.
Oh, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. I this has been so amazing. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I know everyone else here does too.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was a blast. I had a really good time, and I really appreciate you inviting me.
I'm so glad. I just love being able to talk about writing, especially with an author whose work I just absolutely love and I think is so like well written and has so many like interesting concepts all intertwined and developed like very organically and well together, which I feel like can be very difficult to do. So I'm so happy I got to pick your brain a little bit and hear kind of what's going on behind the scenes. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
All right,
That
do
is
you
very kind.
Oh, no, you're the kind one for giving us your time. Seriously, thank you.
Yeah, it's very kind of me to come get praised.
You're taking time out of your schedule. You could be writing. So exciting and definitely not excruciating at all, I know. But
So nice to be here instead of writing. Do you ever find yourself like, "Oh my God, I'm just gonna clean my whole bathroom instead of writing?"
yes,
Uh,
yes.
oh yeah. Yeah, so this is certainly better than cleaning the bathroom, I will say.
I don't know why it's always cleaning, but I feel like something in my brain is like, I don't want to write, so I'll like clean and declutter. I don't know why that's always the default
Hmm.
method of
I
procrastination, but
think
it always is.
I think it's because you can lie to yourself and tell yourself that you are in fact doing something productive and
Yeah.
fulfilling adult responsibilities, but you're not writing. So it's like legitimized procrastination, right?
It's like, well, I would have had to do this at some point anyway. I'm just doing it now.
Exactly.
Oh. Well, do you have any closing words before we wish you well?
Oh gosh, I don't think so, except thank you for inviting me. I truly did have such a fantastic time, and I really appreciate your insightful questions. I feel like I talked about stuff that I've never really talked about in interviews before, and it was really very fun and insightful.
I'm so glad because I always worry about whether I'm asking like interesting questions because I try to ask questions that will like highlight the author's strengths and the things that like I've really enjoyed about their work. So I always hope that they're like interesting and fun questions for both the author and our viewers.
Yes, you are a fantastic host. I've experienced many hosts, and I can say you're very good. You're very good.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. You're gonna make me cry, and that's just not allowed.
We're just gonna spend another 30 minutes just complimenting each other, just like stuck in a complimenting loop.
You would be shocked how often this happens on this stream, mostly with people refusing to take compliments and therefore everyone else feeling the need to be like, what are you talking about? Stop that. Have more confidence. You're
Oh
great.
my gosh. It's just authors, man. That's just the way we are.
It's true. I don't know why that's such a like prominent trait among us. And yet.
It truly is. It's nearly universal.
Oh, we have some things in chat coming in from chat too. Thank you for coming to speak with us. Thank you. Can't wait to read literally everything you'll ever write.
Oh,
So, someone said, I'll scrub my tile grout before I write to get out of it.
that's it. Actually, I, I have a new idea. I'm gonna go scrub my grout.
No,
Thank,
you've
thank
given
you,
her
thank
more
you, dear
methods.
listener.
No, you've given her more methods of procrastination. Now, how are we going to read more of what she's written? Come on now.
Hey guys, give me more ideas.
Oh, wow, look at the time. I think it's time to go.
Versus spoiled again.
Listen, you got to write so we can read your next book and have you on again.
Oh, that's okay. That's true. I can come back. That would be worth it.
Oh, you are always welcome back, whether we are playing games or talking books.
Oh, thank you. I would be delighted to appear again.
I would love that. And I know everyone in chat would too. Thank you so much for being so engaging and so insightful with your process and telling us how you do everything.
Oh, thank you. I'm gonna refrain from gushing more because I
The cycle continues.
it does. The cycle continues. But thank you so much. This was just a great time. And thank you everyone for tuning in. It was wonderful hearing your questions.
Oh, thank you so much. And I hope you have a great rest of your evening.
Oh, you too.
All right. Bye.
Farewell.
Oh, wrong thing. Gosh, oh my gosh. Oh, oh. Okay, I saved all of my deteriorating into fangirling, like meltingness until the end, when she was not here to hear my embarrassingness. Oh my gosh. Oh my god, my heart's beating so fast. God, that was so much fun. Oh my gosh, how can someone be like so cool and like funny and interesting? Oh my gosh, oh my gosh. That was so much fun. Oh, I'm so glad she was willing to come on. That was such a great time. She's so cool. She is. Oh my gosh, I knew she would be, but it's like one and like from her emails we've been sending back and forth, like I knew she was going to be like amazing. But like just still reeling. I get so starstruck by like people I respect. And then when they're so cool on top of it, I can breathe. I can breathe. I never actually imagined that she would come on the podcast. It was one of those things where when I was thinking about who I should try like inviting on next, like as our next guest, because I kind of like asked all of like the people I knew who I thought would be willing to come on. So I was like, well, I'll just, even though it's like far reaching and it's probably like a shot in the dark, I'll just go ahead and ask just my favorite authors because why not? That'd be super fun. I didn't really expect any of them to say yes. So when Margaret Rogerson's publicist got back to me and was like, "Oh yeah, she'd love to," I was already dying. I immediately messaged Shadow, and we were just like screaming incoherently at each other for like 5 minutes straight over text. It was, oh my gosh. I can breathe. I can breathe. Oh my god. Oh my god. And I'm so excited to hear that she's like, I figured she was working on something else, but it's so exciting to like get some hints and like hear some things. Just to show the painting one last time. This is the painting she mentioned, the meeting on the turret stairs that she said her next one is inspired by. So I'm very curious. I'm so curious. I'm gonna love it. I'm gonna pre-order it. I'm gonna read it day one. I'm gonna die. I'm pretty sure. It is scream-worthy. It is scream-worthy. All of this has been scream-worthy. Oh my gosh. Good types of scream-worthy. Oh my gosh. And she said she had a good time. I'm so glad. I'm so glad. That is always my goal. To make sure no one ever regrets that they have like spent their limited time coming on and chatting with us. We must research this in depth. Oh, I'm just so happy. I'm so happy. Oh my gosh. I can't get over how cool and chill she was. Like she was just so down to earth and like fun. Oh. Gosh, when she was talking about how it takes like an hour to like actually psych yourself up like while writing before you remember, "Oh yeah, I love writing." I was just like, "Why is this so relatable?" Why? Why is this the thing? It is the true thing. But yeah. Man, I don't even know. Like, I know I said we would continue stream after the author interview and like hang out and play games, but like, I don't know how I'm supposed to like take all of this excitement and like play games right now. Uh, I guess, yeah, I guess what should we do next? Play games? Fangirl more? I feel like even if I fangirl more, even though like the urge to keep fangirling is within me, I feel like I'm not being coherent right now. I'm literally just saying the same exact two things. I thought we were gonna scream endlessly about Margaret Rogerson. I mean, I would love to. At this point, I just feel though like I'm gonna sound like a broken record about like, oh my god, she was so freaking cool. Oh my god, I love her books. They're so good. She had a good time. I'm so glad she had fun. She was so freaking nice. Oh my god, how is she so sweet? How is she so sweet? Oh, my heart is still like beating so fast. Oh, I'm just hello, hello. Future Crow here. I sure did forget to actually have any kind of ending note to this episode as per usual. But thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this interview with the absolutely amazing, super cool, incredibly kind Margaret Rogerson. This has been one of my favorite episodes, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. As you may have noticed, there was quite a long break between this episode and the last one. Now that we have kind of gotten to a point where I've kind of asked everyone I know personally if they would be willing to come on, I do think the episodes will be coming out a bit more erratically time-wise. The series will absolutely still be continuing, but because it's harder for me to plan and know like when I will be able to get authors on, uh, there may be a few more gaps between episodes than there have been previously. But I hope you'll stick around with us. I've been having so much fun with this series, and I really appreciate everyone who's been supportive, come to the chats to talk and ask questions, and just anyone who's listening and hanging out with us. Thank you guys so much. I hope you had a great time, and I hope I'll see you next time. Bye!